Hello and welcome to another edition of Enta Asks. Joining us today is Carrie Tuttle, leadership coach and founder of Team Mojo. Carrie supports leaders looking to build cohesive teams that deliver exceptional client experiences. Welcome, Carrie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome, Carrie. Thanks for being here. So tell us how you came up with the name Team Mojo. I just love it.
Yeah, it's totally funky. And I was working with a branding expert who was trying to help me come up with a name for my company, because originally it was just my name. And that's not very, original. So what he did was he went through a process of asking me about my clients, and he said, who's your best client? Think of your best client and when you do your best work. And the client was somebody who was going through a period of transition in their life, and they really were struggling to get put any energy into their work and find meaning in what they were doing. And so when I thought of that person, I said, yeah, it's kind of like she's lost her mojo. And now what lights me up is seeing her get it back. So that's when I came up with the mojo part. And then eventually it became, more about teams as well. And so leadership teams is the majority of the people I work with. So yeah, Team Mojo.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So Carrie, how can leaders focus and energize their teams when employees come back on the job and in the office?
Yeah, this is a really important topic right now because of COVID-19, obviously, but even before that, leaders are supporting people through a lot of different stages of their lives, and whether it be because they had to be furloughed because of COVID-19, or whether they were on maternity leave, or other parental leave, I should say, or even a mental health leave. There's lots of reasons that people are away from work, and so it's really critical that leaders prepare not only the employee and themselves, but the team for when that return happens. And it really does come down to communication. So I would kind of break that into three different areas, or that's how I look at it. I look at empathy, so helping leaders to develop their skills in empathy, and then really setting goals for that employee and co-creating those goals, because we might have set up goals at the beginning of the year, but they will have changed a lot since then. And then also clear expectations. What's going to happen? Who does what? When there's a problem, who do we ask, or how do we handle that? And when are we going to check in with each other?
That's great. And so empathy is such a hot topic right now, and everybody's talking about that, and the word vulnerability coming in there. So tell us some tips and tricks to practice good empathy.
Yeah, I think as a leader, one of the challenges is there's a lot of balls in the air, and people are juggling a lot of priorities, especially now that many people are continuing to work from home. So when I think of empathy, I really think it starts with before the conversation. There's an opportunity to reset our brain and be open-minded and open to hearing, so that we can actually listen to what people are saying, and in a space of non-judgment. And then, from there, I really encourage leaders to try not to solve a problem right away. They need to listen to what the employee is saying and just let that sit, let it sit in the air for a minute, and not pounce on it and try and find a solution to that problem right away. And in fact, sometimes the employee will figure out their own solution as they're talking. So it's a great teaching moment, I guess, an empowering moment to allow the employee to just talk and continue to ask questions and understand without, creating, a resolution or like an action item afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And those listening skills are so important. It's so difficult sometimes not to chime in and say, well, you should do this, right? Or you should do that. So,
or me too. I've got a story about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me of the time that I, rode my bike and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Actually sticking on that empathy in that exact situation, so many people, that's how they know how to empathize, is to try to relate what the person's going through to a story that relates to them. But is that true empathy?
I don't think it is. I mean, there's lots of textbook definitions out there, but I I encourage people to certainly put yourself in the other person's shoes, but we can never truly know what someone is feeling. So I'll give you an example that kind of relates to what we're talking about. I have a client who is now returning from maternity leave, and that seems like a really happy thing, right? Like, oh, you had this year off, how exciting. And it hasn't been, yeah, your glory year. It hasn't been for her. And so, you know, as a coach, certainly when she first came to me, I was thinking, well, you know, I had mat leave too, and I went back to work, and it was, you know, certainly there were struggles when I came back, but I was excited to go back to work and excited to, you know, have this little person in my life and see them grow. But it wasn't about me. And so when I really put that on hold, like put my whole story on hold and said, okay, tell me about your experience. What has it been like for you to be on your maternity leave? She said, you know, it's been stressful. My husband got laid off too. He's going back to work now. So we've had financial stress. Not only that, I wanted to take 18 months off, but financially we can't do that. So she's going back to work in a mindset of not really wanting to be there, but yet wanting to, right? Like she likes working, but also very conflicted and having to, you know, put her child in the care of a stranger effectively. Yeah. So there's a lot of conflict that happens for people when they're going through that. And sure, I could say, well, me too, I've been there. I understand what you're going through, but that doesn't make her feel any better. Right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I hear it all the time. People jump in, oh yeah, well, you know, I went through the same situation, but it might be a similar situation, but our interpretation of it's different and our feelings about it would be different. That's, yeah, such a valid point on empathy. So the next thing is then what?
Well, we want as leaders to set goals. And so I encourage people, leaders, before the employee comes back to work to, number one, check in, see how the person's doing before they're coming in. And then you have a bit of an understanding of their mindset. Like, are they enthusiastic? You can tell over the phone, like, are they in a good place? Are they not in a good place? Do they need accommodations? All of these things need to be discussed. So that's really, you know, there's some boxes that need to be checked on the HR side as far as a return to work plan. A lot of companies actually don't employ those though. So I really do encourage leaders to do it. But even further than that, re-look at the goals for the year, whether they're performance goals and even also development goals. And re-look at those with the employee when they come back. And also then coming up with some goals of like, what do you hope to see them accomplish in the first 2 weeks back, 4 weeks back, 2 months back, 3 months back, and then discuss those things with the employee.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. When you think of a brand new employee when they start, there's a bit of a hand-holding process that happens, right? It's kind of, here's your buddy, they'll take you around, they'll show you, you know, it's at least a week. You know, week 2, you know, you're on your own, but first week is usually pretty, you know, pretty welcoming, right? But then somebody coming back from that leave, it's kind of like, oh, they know what to do.
Yeah, it is. It's similar to onboarding a new employee for sure.
And that's so interesting because they are going through this period of transition in their lives, right? They have a baby at home, now they're at work, you know, in the maternity leave example, and they're setting goals for their future. And you as the leader, as the employer, have to also communicate your expectations and set, you know, what's the path forward going to look like, right?
Yeah. And I'll give you a different example, and this one's pretty relevant, well, in a way. So I have another client who manages somebody. His name is Jim. He's a senior building maintenance person who was furloughed. And he's about to come back to work. And the conversation is going to be really interesting because part of his role is now not just building maintenance, not just things like making sure that, you know, structure is maintained and like HVAC is working properly, but also cleanliness. So he's going to be part of the team that is going to have to do deep cleaning in the building. And he doesn't know this yet. And there's a concern that there might be some resistance to having that role put on him because he wouldn't necessarily see himself as a custodian or that kind of role. But it's literally all hands on deck. Like they can't hire that many more people, but there are requirements through, Alberta Health Services that say they have to maintain a certain standard of cleanliness. And so this is where goals and expectations is really important. So if we transition into that expectations conversation, it's a conversation first with yourself as a leader to say, okay, what are my expectations? And what is the communication plan going to be for this employee? But also then for the team. So some people have still been employed through COVID and weren't furloughed, and they had to take on extra responsibilities. So then now that this new person is coming back, some people may be resentful that not only have they been working super hard and you've had a vacation and been working in your garden for 3 months, and I need a break now, but also maybe they got to do tasks that they aspired to do before and didn't have the opportunity because it wasn't part of their role, but now they did, and now they have to give that up again. So there's a lot of conversations that need to happen around return to work that are overlooked by a lot of leaders. They just think, oh, okay, back to business, back into role, everybody, let's just get stuff done, right? And it's not always that simple. So we just need to be mindful of those sensitivities and nuances. And just when we have the conversation in advance and we think about it in advance, what could come up, and we prepare for that, it goes a lot smoother.
That's interesting too, because we typically in the big companies with the process, right?
Yeah.
They say, this is performance review time. This is when we set our goals. This is when we do our expectations, and we'll revisit, some companies a year, some companies twice a year, whatever. But that has nothing to do with the timing of people coming and going from these leaves. So it's really, this is on the leaders to take the initiative to do it.
Oh, for sure. And really, I think most HR professionals would agree with me that a performance review should not be the time that you're having performance conversations, or not the only time, sorry. It should be an ongoing process. And it's an ongoing conversation between you and the employee to understand where do they feel they're at, where are they at as far as performance checkpoints and KPIs. So there should be goals that it's possible to break them down to know, are you on track?
Right.
Yeah. Are you meeting expectations?
Not one and done and you failed.
Right. Not like, gotcha.
Gotcha. Didn't make it. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. And then I like that it's cyclical and it has to keep going, because it starts with that empathy, understanding. Okay, now we need to maybe readjust the goals, the expectations, and it happens again and again and again throughout the cycle.
Absolutely. Well, and that's how you capture. So what's really interesting about when people go on any leave of absence is that time away from work gives them usually some time to reflect and think about what their priorities are. And sometimes they come back and they may have a totally different aspiration. And so example of Susan, the woman coming back from mat leave, she came back and she's in a sales role, and she actually wants to do more social media. And it's not part of her role. And so I said, well, what would happen if you had that conversation with your leader, right? And the funny thing is I'm coaching the leader too. So it's quite a funny little situation, and by the way, the names are fictional. So she said, well, if I have that conversation with my leader, I think they might be open to hearing it, but it's not part of the role. Like, I wonder if other people in the same role would be jealous and be wondering, like, what's she doing? And I don't know if I could hit my sales targets if I'm busy planning social media. So obviously, and they haven't had that conversation yet, but it's like, okay, well, can that be adjusted, right? Can you adjust targets down so that you can spend time on social media, which meets a team goal of attracting more leads? So, there's different conversations that you can have with your staff and find out what are their interests. Maybe they're interested in doing something that the company needs now that it didn't need before.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, as leaders, we should hope that our interests are changing because we're growing, we're learning more, we want to explore, and we should, embrace that. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that the critical thing is communication, that we have the conversation. The fact that we're all, or there's many of us working from home or working more remote and less in the office, that's really just a nuance or a technology piece. That's not the key point here. Right?
Yeah. And it's easy to say, oh, just have the conversation, but some leaders find that they really don't have the structure in place to know how to approach that conversation. Like, how do I organize my thoughts so that I'm covering all the right points? And so those are some of the tools that I build and share with my clients so that they have some structure to be able to do that. There's lots of tools out there for sure.
so, and you and I have had a chat before, and you've got some new stuff coming out.
Yeah, I am actually building more structure around my coaching so that it does tailor to this exact problem, because it's so common, and I'm getting so many people asking for this. So that is what I'm gonna have more announcements coming out in soon. But within the Enta network, if you guys want, I do need a couple more leaders who will give me feedback on the tools. I need leaders who are bringing staff back either, like I would say, in July up to like September, and they can then use the tools. I can explain how they work, and then if they just give me feedback, they can have them for free. So yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, our network's gonna love that. Well, thank you very much, Carrie. We appreciate that. We appreciate you being on and talking with us about that. And, under that umbrella of communication and really the empathy, the goals, and the expectations. And that's not a once and done. It's a continual progression. And those 3 points are really valid. And we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks very much, Carrie.